John Howard, welcome to Straight Talk.
Thank you. I am very happy to be with you. I won't use that sort of, de rigueur, good to be with you expression when people are interviewed on TV these days.
Well, it's actually it's a great privilege, actually, to be honest with you, for me to sit here, and I'm not trying to, do the usual thing. I'm sure everybody says that to you, but someone who's been around a long time, in my case, and your case too. I remember you back in the Treasurer days, and
It's
a
long time ago.
It was, and I was in my 20s, early 20s, and I remember you one time. You were a young treasurer. You hosting something for the for the Tax Institute of Australia or something like that.
Yeah, that'd be right.
And I was a member, and it was held at the Hilton Hotel. And you
were like all Australian business people. You didn't like the tax system because it made you pay tax. I understood that.
Totally. And
and I thought Kerry Packer got tax right when he said that, you don't queue up to donate extra.
Yeah, correct. And to some extent, his following comment was, and I don't think you use it very well, or you spend it very well, or something along those lines of what they collect. He said you have to have rocks.
And you're not doing such a great job.
That's what it was.
That they're queuing up to donate extra.
And I have to tell you, you look great for someone of your vintage. Are you still walking?
I still walk and everything. I'm lucky. I got reasonably good genes. I'm still perpendicular.
That helps.
Better than the alternative.
Yeah, absolutely. And you probably, how old are you now? 85 or 86?
I turned 86 in July.
Wow.
Well, I just had lunch with somebody who was close to 10 years older than that.
Wow. And I presume they're still.
And he was as sharp as a tack, so gives me a goal. My wife said to me that there are three former prime ministers who reached 90 or more. So your immediate goal is to make that 4. So I think that's a reasonable goal. It's only 4 years off, but 4 years at the age of 86 is quite an eternity.
And you're very sharp still. You feel good?
I don't know. A lot of people, 50% of the population, never thought I was the least bit sharp.
Well, of course, they didn't vote for you, but they were never going to vote for you anyway,
no,
irrespective. Do you mind if I just ask you this?
Please.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in the suburb of Earlwood, which is near Campsie in Canterbury, and I attended Earlwood Public School and Canterbury Boys High School, and I lived in Earlwood until I married when I was 31 or something.
And your parents?
My mother and father, my father was born in a place called Cowper on the Northern Rivers area of New South Wales, and he was apprenticed as a fitter and turner at the CSR sugar mill in Harwood Island, and he left that at the age of 19 to go and fight in World War I. He volunteered for service, and he was gassed in Belgium, but he recovered, but it affected him. And he, when he came back, he established a garage business near Dulwich Hill Station.
You mean like petrol station type?
Petrol station. They call it a garage.
Yeah, I remember
He was a qualified motor mechanic, so he fixed cars. And in those days, private entrepreneurs provided certifications when you wanted to register your car. So it was a case of it was nationalised by I don't know who. And I always thought that was sort of an unnecessary regression. But anyway, Dad did that. And my very first job was serving petrol at Dad's garage. And he had what was called a multiple service station. He had a Shell pump and a Mobil gas pump and CSR, Ampol pump, different ones. And then later on he signed up with one of the oil companies. But it was a different business then. And I enjoyed working at a garage. I did a lot. I enjoyed it a lot. I was paid what I described as son's rates.
That can't be good.
No, they the Industrial Relations Commission would have gone berserk about them, but I didn't. I thought it was a great privilege to do it.
And your mum, did she work, or she
No, Mum was
stayed at home?
I was the youngest of 4 boys in the family, and Mum was what is now called a full-time homemaker. She worked hard, and she was a wonderful woman. Both my parents were. My father died when I was only 16, and my Mum lived to the age of about 80, and they were great parents, and they were sort of fiercely patriotic, pro-monarchist, conservative voting people. They only ever voted differently on one occasion from each other, that is, in the referendum in 1951 to abolish the Communist Party. My father voted yes, which was what Menzies wanted. He's then the Prime Minister. My mother voted no. She just sort of thought that you didn't ban anything.
That's very interesting.
Well, didn't ban any opinions.
Because most people would not know how serious the view on the Communist Party was during that period.
1951, you've got
Yes.
to understand. In 1951, the world was well into the Cold War. It had only been less than 2 years since Mao Zedong took over in China. And when you think of the threat that China now poses and the preoccupation of the world with China's power, particularly in our region, and the Korean War, which involved communist North Korea invading the South and also involved China entering the war when the Allied forces largely, but not only Americans, had driven north to the border between North Korea and China in the Yalu River. It was pretty hectic. And a lot of people thought at the time, and I was only about 12, and I thought, gee, this will get carried. And Mum and Dad just disagreed. They didn't. I remember them had a bit of what I would call a lively discussion about it on the kitchen table one night, and my mother made it very clear that she would make up her own mind. Not that my father was trying to convince her, he was just putting his point of view, and he said, okay, and that was that.
So you went to University of Sydney, I think it was, and you did a law degree?
I did a straight law degree. In those days, you didn't have to do an arts or economics degree. You could do, beforehand, you could do law as a single undergraduate.
Yeah, it was just like a single degree, as opposed to the double degree.
4 years, and I got an LLB from Sydney University, and I was articled after the first 2 years. And I was articled to a wonderful man, Meyer Rosenblum, who'd played rugby for Australia, and his son Rupert played rugby for Australia.
Rupert, I'm thinking of, yes.
He was one of the most remarkable people I met. He was polymath is probably not the right description, but he was a great solicitor, a good business head, could speak several languages, and he held the state hammer throw record and represented Australia at what was then known as the Empire Games hurdles. And on top of all of that, he was a good lawyer, and I learnt a lot from him.
And how is it, though, a young man goes from a family growing up in Earlwood, going to Canterbury Boys High, and then, working class area, parents aren't...
Well,
why did you become a solicitor?
Earlwood was what you would call a lower middle class area. How I best describe it would be, in a good year, the Liberal Party would poll 52% at the local public school. In a bad year, we'd poll 47 or 48, so it was pretty even. It wasn't strong Labor, but it certainly wasn't a blue ribbon area. And it was a nice suburb, and I was very happy living there.
Because I grew up in the Punchbowl, Lakemba area.
Well, the Punchbowl would be more Labor.
It was, and it was one of the Duracs. I can't remember which Durac was our local member. And he
was part of the Stewart family.
Correct.
The Stewarts of Canterbury.
Yep, Catholic family.
They were like the Kennedys of Canterbury.
Yep, very strong Catholic family.
A very strong rugby league.
Yeah.
Because the father of Frank and Kevin was the president of the Canterbury Bankstown Rugby League. for many
Yeah,
years, and very staunch Catholic, yes. And it was the pattern of those days, more so than now. If you saw yourself as working class, you followed rugby league, and it's true that until probably the 1990s, 80s and 90s, the overwhelming majority of Catholics in Australia voted Labor, not for any doctrinal reason. It was just that
they did.
there were socioeconomic reasons. They were less well off than many others, and they identified more immediately because of that with the Labor Party. But that changed big time during the period that I was in Parliament.
Did your brothers? So you got four. There's four
I
sons.
had three older brothers.
Yeah.
The oldest two of them are now deceased. The next eldest one is 89. He'd be 89, and
Go you good thing.
Hmm?
Go you good thing. You want him to keep
Go
going.
him good thing. Yeah, he
He's-
votes Labor, but he's good. It doesn't matter. We're good friends. He's good bloke, Bob. We get together regularly and chat about politics, and he lives in Leichhardt. We go round to the local coffee shop and solve the problems of the world.
Do you think, though, it was an unusual thing? Because I know it was an unusual thing where I grew up for a young person in those environments, Earlwood, Punchbowl, wherever, to end up in a law school. Like, you know, for me, I actually wanted to become a bricklayer, but my mother dragged me to the university. It wasn't a thing where I grew up. Like, the other kids weren't doing it. Nobody else seemed to be going to university to become a professional. Why did you decide you want to go and become a lawyer, or is it just because you matriculated that way?
Canterbury Boys High School was a selective high school for that area.
Right.
For the Canterbury, Bankstown, St George area, along with Sydney Tech. Sydney Tech's probably most famous product of that era was Reg Gasnier.
Right. Oh, really? Reg Gasnier?
Yeah, he was, and but you know, a lot of my classmates went to university. In those days, to get to university, you had to pass 5 subjects, one of which was English, and I managed to do that. I got there, and on the first year, my mother was able to pay my fees. Second year, I picked up a Commonwealth scholarship, which meant my fees were paid, and I picked it up because somebody else had dropped it. And I completed my law degree and then my articles.
Articles being like an apprenticeship where
apprenticeship for a lawyer.
Yeah, you'd go and join.
It was a
join
good
law firm.
system.
Yeah.
And you weren't paid much, but then you weren't worth much.
Yeah. Yeah, but you learn a lot.
You learnt a hell of a lot. I learnt a lot from Meyer. He was a very good teacher.
And then, so you worked in the legal environment for 5-10 years or something along those lines?
Well, I worked after I left law school. I finished my articles, and then I got a job with a large firm, very good firm, and then I went abroad. When I was 24, I did the usual thing of going to London and working there for a while and then doing Europe. And I worked with a firm of solicitors in Ilford in Essex, just not far out of London, and spent a lot of time at the Stratford Magistrates Court, which was close to the East End of London, and you had the usual collection of characters as you would get at the Waverley Police Court or whatever, and that was all part of life's experience. And I met some interesting people and a couple of friends of mine, and I happened to be in London when Winston Churchill died. He died at the age of 90 in 1965, and I remember standing at the foot of Ludgate Hill and watching his funeral procession go by, and along with an English girl that I was seeing a bit at the time, I went back to her family's home and listened to a few speeches from the crypt of St Paul's. One of them was delivered by Menzies, who was then of course, still Prime Minister, and had attended the funeral, and he was so eloquent. All the English people said, "Oh, can we have him?" I said, "No chance." So then I came back and...
Were you inspired listening to Menzies?
Oh, I thought Menzies was a great orator. He is the best political orator I've ever heard. He was terrific. He was magisterial. He had a deep, resonant voice, and he commanded things. And there's often comparisons made between him and Winston Churchill. I've studied the speaking methods, and Menzies was very different. He was a better stump orator, if I could put it that way. Churchill wrote all his speeches, and they were wonderfully inspirational. I mean, the language was terrific, but Menzies could command a presence in a hall or whatever splendidly.
Yeah, and so what inspired you then to think about politics, or were you always interested in the politics?
Look, I was always interested. I remember when I was at school, the last year, the teacher said, English, I forget which one, said, "I want each of you boys to write out the 3 occupations that you'd like to embrace." And I wrote lawyer, journalist, and detective. Yeah, I suppose you can sort of see some connection between the detective and the journalist. I was always interested in journalism as a profession. I think it's a very important part of our social fabric. A good journalist, and there are plenty of them in Australia and the rest of the world, is a great asset. And we've had some wonderful journalists in Australia.
And so, but did you at some stage get inspired to become one of the young Liberals or enroll in the Liberal Party?
I was always interested in politics because we talked politics at home, and being the youngest in the family, I absorbed all the talk, and my dad had, I think partly because of his service in World War One, and he'd been quite an admirer of what Winston Churchill was saying in the 1930s before Churchill became Prime Minister, when Churchill was really out of favour and people thought he was a warmongering ratbag. They did. And in fact, he owes as much to the Labor Party opposition in Britain and the English Liberals as he does the Conservative Party in finally becoming Prime Minister.
How do you mean?
Well, the Conservative Party didn't want him. The British establishment wanted the then Foreign Minister, Lord Halifax, to become the Prime Minister. But Halifax didn't want it, or perhaps deep down was honest with himself and realised he couldn't do it. And it is said, and we'll never know, that the late King didn't want him either. That was the current King's grandfather.
Yeah, King George.
George VI.
Yep.
Now, look, in the end, Churchill got it, but when he got it, and it's often sort of only not a matter of great significance, although it's interesting for political fanatics, that when he became Prime Minister, he was not actually leader of the Conservative Party. Chamberlain remained leader of the Conservative Party until he died 6 months later.
And if because I often wonder about when I think of your Prime Ministership and also your period as a Treasurer, I often wonder to myself, what was it about John Howard that made him so popular? Now, I'm not here to,
I don't think I was all that popular.
But towards the end, perhaps not, and on occasions you were, but generally speaking, you were. And I talk to people today, people still talk about you very fondly. And in fact, I ask her, and downstairs next door to us, is a real estate agent called Kramer. And his grandfather was your predecessor, Sir Kramer.
Sir John Kramer.
Yeah,
he
at
was
Bennelong.
In real estate. He owned half of Wollstonecraft.
And he was the Bennelong predecessor.
Yeah, he was. There's a joke about him. I'm sure it's a joke that he was in the later stages of his career Army Minister, and he was reviewing a passing out parade in this huge expanse. He turned around to the commanding officer, brigadier general, whoever it was, taking salute, he said, "Officer, this would make a wonderful subdivision."
Well, that sounds like what Trump's talking about in relation to Palestine at the moment. It's just a bit scary.
Yeah, well,
We won't go there. So,
oh, I don't mind if you do.
but-
I've got a view.
yeah, and I'll bring that a bit later. But Earl did say to me, Earl Kramer, who's the grandson of Sir John Kramer,
Yeah.
said to me exactly what I said to you a moment ago. He said, I've always liked John Howard, and Earl would be late 60s. And he said, I've always liked John Howard. And I said, well, what question would you ask him? He said, I wouldn't ask him a question. He said, but I'd like to know what, from his point of view, from your point of view, what was it in your makeup? Is it your humble beginnings? Is it the fact you lived in Earlwood? I don't know. Were you?
Well, I like to think that I was brought up to be, do the right thing. I owe a lot to my parents. We were a close family, but we all had our own views. And I remained close to my 3 older brothers. There was a 13-year age gap between the eldest and me, and then Stan was 9 years, and then Bob 3. And we talked about politics, and it attracted me. I think from the very beginning, I enjoyed public speaking or debating. And that gave me, years later in Parliament, I reflected that whatever capacity I had to speak off the cuff or respond with a degree of spontaneity I had learnt at school. I debated from the second year I was at high school, and I was in the school's debating team, which participated in what was called the Hume Barber competition, which was the competition between the 8 or 9 selective high schools: Canterbury, Fort Street, North Sydney Tech, Sydney High.
Which becomes Sydney Boys High, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but John, like, do you think that you represented certain values? I mean, do you think?
Oh, yes, we
Yeah.
had. I mean, I represented the values of what I called Middle Australia.
Yeah.
And I was certainly not brought up to think the government could solve every problem. If anything, my father thought that people who were connected with the government were a nuisance rather than a help. Now, that was unfair, but it was his experience. Later on, my wife's father became a very senior public servant in the New South Wales government, and he was a wonderful man, and he ended up being the chief civil engineer of the New South Wales Railways Department. And he was a very ethical man, very proper. And I suspect, although he was I suspect he always voted Liberal, but that was a matter for him. But my point is that you can't typecast people. One of the things I learned early on, you can't regard all people who've got a trade union background as being automatically Labor, although most of them were. Equally, not everybody in business is anti-Labor.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Particularly more recently, when I say the last 10, 15 years. I think I was certainly brought up to believe in the essential fairness and decency of the average Australian. Now, fairness, decency, average Australian, they're words that are flung around, but I think they mean something. And I've met a lot of people on all sides of politics who've fit that category, and I've met a lot who don't, including some in my own party, but I won't go into.
And I've often said, good leaders, very good treasurers, make good leaders, both at state level, and we've seen it on many occasions, and at the federal level. Your period as a treasurer, what are your recollections of that period?
Oh, it was difficult because I inherited a fiscal position that was worse than I expected.
As in deficits and debt?
Oh, yeah. The previous budget, which had been, I think, spent too much money, and And I had to, in my first budget, I had to increase personal income tax, which didn't make me very popular. And then I did some very tricky things with tax avoidance. When I say tricky, imposed what was seen by many people as retrospective methods of collecting unpaid tax that should have been paid in the first place. And that didn't make me very popular in many traditional Liberal voting areas of Australia.
Was that around the period, was Sir Garfield Barwick the Chief Justice at the time?
No, no, he wasn't.
Is this around Section
Agar
260?
had gone before then.
He'd gone already.
Although it's fair to say that a lot of people said that one of the reasons why tax avoidance flourished was that there was a belief that the so-called Barwick-dominated High Court took an excessively pro-taxpayer view of the anti-avoidance sections of the Act. Now, I think some of that was unfair. I think some of it was probably a bit accurate, but whatever it was an issue. And I felt that the ordinary taxpayer, whether an employee, a public servant, or small business who did the right thing, had every reason to complain. Yet, on the other hand, there was a lot of truth in what Kerry Packer said. Not that he was advocating tax evasion. He was just saying you shouldn't pay more than you have to. Well, and a lot of people believe that, and I think I probably do. But equally, there are some dodges that people shouldn't embrace. And I remember at the time that a couple of very prominent accountants in Sydney wrote to me and said they agreed with what I was doing because they didn't like these tax avoidance practices, but many of their clients said, why can't you get me one of those schemes? And we felt that we were under increasing pressure to do so.
And we're talking about the 70s and 80s, and it was pretty full on then too,
yeah.
these schemes. And I remember many years prior to that, but Sir Garfield Barwick, at one time there in a what they call an anti-avoidance case, he made a very interesting observation. He said, war paint does not make the warrior. And the reason he said that is because people used to dress up these schemes as being something that they weren't.
Well, he was right.
And
what I set out to do was that there was a general anti-avoidance provision in the Tax Act, Section 260, that said that if the dominant purpose, in effect, this is the layman's explanation, not very good one, I'm sorry, but that if the dominant purpose of the transaction is to avoid tax rather than achieve a commercial objective, then it's void. Now, the problem became that most people in the tax office and many people in the professions said around that time that the High Court had so interpreted it and so read down the impact that Section 260 was virtually worthless. So I said to the Tax Commissioner when I became Treasurer that one of my goals was to rewrite Section 260 to make it more effective. And he said, you're wasting your time. The High Court will find a way around it. Now, I thought that, this was after Barwick had gone, let me say. I thought this was close to the time that he went. I thought that was a bit unreasonable, a bit defeatist.
Yeah, capitulation.
So I set about having it rewritten, and eventually we did, and we produced a new section, which in the technician's language is called Part 4A. And that seems to have worked. You've obviously studied it.
Well, I worked in that environment. I worked in a law firm that we used to advise on those things for many, many years.
You agree with my assessment? That
yes, I do.
4A worked?
Yeah, it still does work.
Yeah, I think it's largely stopped it. Not completely, and probably never will, perhaps never should.
There's always going to be someone who's going to try and work around the edges.
And it's part of the to and fro, I suppose.
So you would have been around, and I don't know in what capacity, whether you're in opposition or whether you were in government at the time, but on the 1st of July 1985, I think it was, they introduced the capital gains tax, and negative gearing also came in. And I think there was a Labor Party was
The
in
which?
the capital gains tax.
Oh, that was the Labor Party.
Yeah, in 1 July. And of course, negative gearing became a part of that process because, you're losing money, so you're trying to earn income, you're losing money, so you should be entitled to tax deduction. That legislation going right back to 1985 still stands today, and we often hear politicians want to tinker with that stuff. What do you think in a political sense?
I would leave the capital gains tax provisions where they are.
The discount, capital gains tax.
Well, the discount was introduced by my government, by Peter
Right.
Costello, but we had no capital gains tax at all until 85.
Yep.
And that was introduced by Paul Keating as Treasurer. And what is often forgotten, though, is that we had, from my recollection, we had a brief period where negative gearing was abolished.
Yeah, I do remember that. Yeah.
And it was only 6 or 12
A
months.
short period. Keating abolished it, I think.
He did. And it resulted in a massive, as I recall, a massive increase in rents. And there was a lot of hurrying and scurrying, and they decided to bring it back, and it's remained ever since. And of course, a lot of the Labor people pushed for its removal. Look, I think the debate will go on about it. I think there's a case for a capital gains tax.
That there should be a tax on capital gains.
Oh,
yes.
yeah, I think there is a case for it. Yes.
Yep. And exemptions.
Now whether, with appropriate exemptions, I don't for a moment think it should apply to the family home. There'll always be very pricey family homes and that escape it, but that doesn't alter the fact there's a principle. And where do you draw the line? What's an excessively valuable family home?
Yeah, totally.
A lot of people in different parts of Australia have bought in at ludicrously low cost, and then over the years have seen the value rise. So I think there's certainly a strong case for it, but with exemptions, and I think it'd be a mistake for the government to try and get rid of the discount. I imagine that they are looking at it. I don't know.
Because, of course, Chris Bowen and Bill Shorten found that out in very short shrift.
Well, I thought Bowen and Shorten misread the mood of Middle Australia. They saw that as an attempt to pay for their excessive spending by increasing tax on Middle Australia. And people who've saved hard and gone from, not rags to riches, but gone from modest circumstances to relatively comfortable circumstances, and normally have done that because of their hard work, and they resent like hell that being heavily taxed.
John, you've mentioned on a couple of occasions the phrase Middle Australia, and I seem to recall Menzies made a very famous speech about the forgotten people, which was that about Middle Australia?
Well, I mean, that was the phrase he used. He was really talking about, on the one hand, the organised power of the trade union movement. And that was an era where everybody, so to speak, belonged to a union, if you could. And the other group he was talking about, what he called big business and organised. And he thought the people in the middle, they were forgotten, they were squeezed out. Both descriptions were a bit of an exaggeration, a broad brush, but there was some truth in that. And the union movement, when I first went into Parliament, had a lot more members than it does now, but so does every organisation. One of the things we have to understand about contemporary Australia is that we are no longer a nation of joiners.
Joiners as in trades joiners?
Oh, unions.
Joiners of unions, right.
No, joiners of organisations. We have fewer trade unions. We have fewer people who are religiously affiliated. They don't join churches. We have even local PNCs, often straight for members. And this has been, it started, I think, with the widespread adoption of television, and then it's only been aggravated by social media. Social media is so antisocial. It's social in a sense, but it takes away. Why do you need to have morning coffee with your friends when you've got social media? I have to say to you, I don't have Facebook. I don't embrace social media at all. So I should not talk. I should not pronounce. But my instinct tells me that it has accelerated the trend towards a more insular society away. And the real victims of that are organisations. People who support the Liberal Party are saying to me, oh, our branches are weak, people don't come and people don't join anymore. I say, do you think the Labor Party's any different? And I said, I don't think it is. I think if you were interviewing my opposite number in the Labor Party, he or she might, in a moment of honesty, agree with me. People just don't join. Now, a lot of reasons for that. I think the old pattern often, when Mum cooked a meal on the table when Dad got home from work, when you went off to the union meeting or meeting of some other organisation, that's part of it. I think the spread of social media has only accelerated it. But it's a phenomenon, and I would say to people, if any of them listening to this, that if you're worried about the membership of the Liberal Party, just remember that it's not alone. It's not just the Liberal Party suffering a membership challenge. It's many other organisations.
Across the board. Across the board.
Across the board, we are no longer the nation of joiners we were.
That's very interesting. And if we look at our nation today, and this might be a difficult question to answer straight away, but what other things have you seen changed at a national level, like that are significant? What are the significant things you've seen change, apart from not being a nation of joiners? What about things like, at one stage, everyone was part of a religion? You're either Jewish, Catholic, maybe Muslim, Greek Orthodox, whatever. You identified, most of us, Church of England, you identified as a part of a religion. Well,
I think one of the big changes is that, right on the issue of religion, we are no longer as sectarian. I'm old enough to recall that there were often great rivalries and contests between Catholics and Protestants.
Yep.
More Catholics and Masons.
Oh, really?
In organisations like the police. We're talking about, it was often a joke in New Zealand that you alternated between a Catholic and a Mason as the Commissioner of Police in New South Wales. That's no longer talked about. Now, I think that's a good thing. Now, I'm not pretending for a moment that religious observance is as strong now as it was 40 or 50 years ago, but I think the decline has been part of this overall decline in people joining organisations. And I think the end of sectarian has been a good thing. People, and I think it's affected politics. I think I said earlier that years ago the great bulk of Catholics voted Labor, not because the Catholic Church told them to. It's just that they came from largely our Irish heritage, and they were poor and more working class. But that's changed, and that's good.
During your period, let's talk when you're in opposition and when you were the Prime Minister. Let's look at the 80s and 90s, just at that for the moment. Who are some of your great rivals that you admire today when you look back at it, as opposed to what happened in the bear pit? But, are any of your rivals standouts that you admire, and what would you admire them for?
Oh, I had an enormous respect for Kim Beazley. He's the best Labor Prime Minister we didn't have. I think if Beazley had remained leader of the Labor Party and defeated me, as Kevin Rudd did in 2007, Beazley would have been there for quite a while. He'd have treated his colleagues better. Now, I respected him. I thought Hawke was undoubtedly the most capable Labor Prime Minister, I stress the adjective, this country's ever had. He was bright. He had great communication skills on television, particularly, and he had an instinct for the common man, and he had a bit of the larrikin in him. Well, he was natural. I mean, he didn't know. I mean, I never thought he thought he overdid it. He was comfortably egalitarian. Some people try too hard to be egalitarian. He didn't. He was comfortable.
It was natural.
Natural.
Do you think that style of person leading a party, whether it's Liberal or Labor today, would stand out as a leader and actually help get that party voted in?
Well, if providing that person bright. I mean, Bob Hawke was quite bright. I had occasion to talk to him about policy issues and that. He was quite bright. He was on top. I mean, he had his prejudices, no doubt he thought I did, but he was always on top of his subject. Now, anybody who's a comfortable, natural egalitarian who's also bright will do well, because that's what people like. People, they want to understand their politicians. They want to feel they can relate to them, and they obviously want to believe in what they're saying. Now, it's not always easy to get together, but then I'm not an expert on this.
I don't know. I'm not sure whether you're not an expert on these things. I say you got a pretty good instincts on it because, in terms of long-serving prime ministers, you're right up there. So because today everything is poll driven. Okay, they do polls. They got digital means to find out what's going on, what everyone thinks. Back in your day, what did you do to find out?
Polling was important then. Perhaps not as obsessively so as now. I think the pressure for an instantaneous response to everything is greater now. And people get into error because they feel they've got to say something. Well, if you haven't thought about what you're going to say, don't say it. That's the advice I'd give anybody in politics. And the other advice I'd give them is get a bit of life outside of politics before you try and go into Parliament. A lot of young men and women come and see me and say, we're Liberals and we'd like to be in Parliament. And you got any advice? The first thing is if you join the local branch, you should do that. I said, secondly, what are you doing? We've just got a degree and I'd like to work for a politician. I said, well, don't. I mean, if you want to do that, I don't want to stop you. But you've got this pattern now where if you're Labor inclined, you go to university, you then work for a union in not fixing a house or anything like that. You work in the union office.
The admin.
And then you get a job on a politician's staff. And wonderful staffers. I mean, I've got some wonderful staff, and I had in people like Arthur Sinodinos, an outstanding chief of staff. But you then get pre-selected for a seat. What experience of life have you had? And I say to these people, get 10 years. And if you're a lawyer, practice law for 10 years. If you're a doctor or if you're a public servant, a teacher, plenty of teachers. Not all teachers are Labor. I mean, there's a view among some Liberals that every teacher votes Labor. Well, that's not right. And just do something. You have a better understanding then of what the average man and woman does and experiences in life.
So when you won in 90, I think it was 96,
96.
yep, and you knocked off Keating, and we'd been through a pretty tough period economically during that period. We'd had a
Mm.
lot of inflation, interest rates very high, etc. What gave you the courage to start to think about and develop the GST, the goods and services tax?
Well, I'd been a long-term advocate of broadening the back indirect. When I was treasurer, I made 2 attempts to do that, and both of them were knocked back by the cabinet. One of them was I talked at large quite early on of a retail turnover tax, which is a form of indirect tax, and that caused a lot of unrest amongst some of my ministerial colleagues, and I think the Prime Minister was unhappy about that anyway. He just sort of said, "Not on, John." So I gave that away, and then in advance of the 1980 election, I reached an understanding with both Malcolm Fraser and Doug Anthony, excuse me, that we would not rule out during the campaign the possibility of tax reform. Then after the campaign, I announced that we would review the tax system, including the possibility of introducing what I then called a broad-based indirect tax, which is a GST. And then Malcolm, for reasons that no doubt he could have explained at the time, decided that that was politically unacceptable, and it was knocked off. But it was not on the basis that I couldn't go ahead. So I put up a submission to Cabinet, and I knew it was going to be defeated. But I wanted to be on record, and I advocated the introduction of a tax on goods and services and some reductions in income tax. And it was heavily defeated in Cabinet, although some of my colleagues particularly, but not only, from Western Australia supported me.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and that was that. So I had a track record, and when Labor won the election in 84 and they called the tax summit, Paul Keating proposed a 12.5% consumption tax, remembered as option C, and I publicly supported it. I was shadow treasurer, and I remember going to his office, and he gave me a copy of the document and we talked about it a lot, and I support him. Anyway, in the end, that fell foul of Bob Hawke and the unions. They didn't want it. So they settled for just introducing the capital gains tax and the fringe benefits tax and
That's right.
a few other things, and that was.
Yeah. So, but
So and then we ruled out having, in the 96 campaign, we ruled out in different ways having an indirect tax in our first term, although I did use the expression never ever, and that was hung around my neck obligingly by the Labor Party, which was understandable because never ever means never ever. But we then thought that if we designed in full, which we did, and Peter Costello did a remarkable job with the detail of this, a new tax system, including a 10% GST, and we unveiled that, and then within weeks I called the election. Now I thought to myself, they can't complain that I've broken my commitment because I'm flinging the whole thing on the table and it's going to an election. If they don't like it, or they don't like me or whatever I said and didn't say, they can vote against me. Now, a lot of them did. We lost a lot of seats, but we had a big majority. And I took the view that if you've got a big majority, you might as well use it.
do something bold.
Do something bold, otherwise it'll disappear for no return. You can be certain of one thing: if you get a big majority in Parliament, in one Parliament, it won't last. So you either watch it erode or you do something with it. Now, the only occasion I can remember where the majority in one parliament followed the majority in the earlier parliament was 1975 and 1977. 75 was Fraser v. Whitlam. 77 was Fraser v. Whitlam. And I think most people still sort of saw that as a continuation. And, of course, by 1980, when Bill Hayden had become leader of the Labor Party, a very honourable man, I thought, Hayden, things had changed and the Liberal Party lost quite a lot of seats. Not in Queensland so much, but certainly in Victoria.
So when people say right now, the majority that the parliamentary majority that the Labor Party has right now in Australia at federal level, when they say, look, we're probably going to see 2 or 3 terms of this Labor Party.
Can't be certain of that.
No, so you're sort of saying just be careful because things change.
Well, I can tell. Let me take example of my own defeat. I mean, the night of the 2007 election, Kevin Rudd was triumphant. I remember ringing him, congratulating him, and discussing arrangements about moving in and out of Kirribilli and the Lodge. I thought he'd be in there for a couple of terms, as I thought Whitlam would be in for a couple of terms after 72. But that didn't materialise, and I mean, I was amazed when the Labor Party got rid of Rudd. I thought they would never have done that to Beazley if he'd have been leader. Not that that's any comfort to Beazley. It's just the theoretical musings of a political opponent.
And I one of the things that not many people would know or remember, because you are best known for your GST. You're also best known for the gun laws.
The gun laws.
Was that a courageous move, or was that just something that had happened?
People have been kind enough to call it courageous. I think it was the right thing to do, and I took the view that the scale of the tragedy, 35 people died at the hands of one person. And one of my vivid recollections was that John Major, who was still, not for long, the Prime Minister of Britain, he rang me up and said, I'm terribly sorry to hear about this. He said, I never thought that, no, he was in an email, I think. I never thought that after the Dunblane massacre in Scotland, where a gunman had gone to a school, shot 27 kids. I never thought you'd get anything like that again. I can't believe 35 people in remote Tasmania and had. And I just felt I had to do something. And I had this huge majority. I'd only been Prime Minister a couple of months. I think it was the 28th of April 1996, and I think I'd been sworn in on the 11th of March, so it was nowhere near 2 months. I just felt if I didn't do something, so I decided to throw the book at it. And we didn't have the power, constitutional power, to ban the weapons, but the states, if they agreed to do it, then that was enough. And it was made fairly clear that if states didn't agree, we'd call a referendum to transfer the power to the Commonwealth and
back to the Constitution.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And I'm certain that if we'd been required to do that, the public would have voted overwhelmingly to shift the power because they felt very strongly that something had to be done. They didn't want us to go down the American path. But I did understand how hard it was for some of my rural colleagues, particularly in the National Party, but not only. Tim Fisher and John Anderson and the National Party Premier of Queensland, Rob Borbidge, did a wonderful job on this. They bore the brunt of it. And you had a lot of farmers and so forth who sort of said, well, we agree with you, Prime Minister, but why take our guns? We keep them safely stored and we don't murder anybody. Why should we be victimised? And I just sort of said, well, it won't work unless there's a blanket ban. And we did offer to you know, give people proper compensation. And it worked, and I am proud of it, and I think the country should be proud of it. And I did have good support, not only from those National Party figures, but Bob Carr, the Labor Premier of New South Wales, was a very strong supporter.
And thank God, because today Australia wears the benefit of that, I think.
It does. That's something that, I mean, we still have tragedies and murders, but mass murders, however you might describe, have not occurred since. Now there'll be arguments, and something could happen tomorrow. I don't know, but I pray God it won't. But there is a view around the world that we've done something lasting and beneficial in that area. Now, I don't lecture Americans about it. They're a different country and a different culture. They have a fixation about guns that I can't understand, except they did have a revolutionary beginning.
Yeah.
The British were happy to give us our independence. God bless them for that. And whereas in America it was different. And I think America is a more polarised country. They are very intense about their differences, the Americans.
And they did have a civil war too. And they did have a civil war too.
A civil war, yeah, that was over. I mean, we would never have a civil war. We couldn't be bothered having a civil war over something.
And
thank heavens.
And I said a bit earlier, and often people say to me, what do you remember about the John Howard period? And one of the things that stands out in my mind, and it's particularly important to me, but during the 1998, 1999, 2000 period, 2001 period, when you were the PM and Peter was the Treasurer, Peter Costello, there was something that happened that benefited all Australians that most Australians to this very day don't realise. And that is that you guys, the Liberal Party, let's call it, supported in Parliament and gave voice to the people who took on the banks. And you managed to support Aussie Home Loans, my business Wizard Home Loans, which I was with Kerry Packer, and another one. There was another big contender. And you supported us by putting pressure on the banks to make sure the banks, every time there was an interest rate reduction, that they passed it on to borrowers.
Oh, yes.
It was a big deal.
Well, it was very important because, and it was largely just done by jawboning.
Yeah, it was. In Parliament, though. You did
in Parliament. Oh, yes. Peter in particular did that. Did it very well.
Because I remember, and Joe Hockey at the time was he ultimately became the Treasurer, but he was the Minister for Financial Services. And Joe Hockey one day rang me and he said, look, and I think it was in 2000, it was after you introduced the GST, we had a bit of a slump in the Australian economy in the 2000 period, 2001 beginning. And Joe rang me up and he said to me, Mark, the Prime Minister, and he quoted you, and I've never been able to get to the bottom of it, and Joe's never told me whether it's actually happened or not, but he said, the Prime Minister has asked me to ring up all the major non-bank lenders. Will you pass on the interest rate reduction that's coming out on the first Tuesday of February to Australians in 6 weeks or in a shorter period? Because in those days when it was an interest rate rise, we passed it on straight away. But when there was an interest rate reduction, everyone held back for a little while and we made some money out of it.
Nothing much has changed.
Yeah, and Joe rang me up and I said, well, Joe, because I knew him fairly well at the time, and I said, well, I don't know, I'll ask Kerry what he wants to do. So I went to Kerry and Kerry said to me, well, son, if you think you can do a better deal than what's currently going, do it. And I said, so I rang Joe up and said, Joe, Wizard, we'll pass the interest rate reduction on in 12 days. He said, thank you, I'm going to go back and talk to the Prime Minister. And Parliament was on. It must have just started or something. And he rings me up about an hour later. He said, spoke to the Prime Minister. He said, he's heard that Westpac are going to pass it on in 10 days. And I said, well, Joe, I offered 12, and I thought, is he having a crack at me here or not? And I said, well, Kerry's left it to me, and it'll be my neck on the line if it doesn't work out. So I said, well, we'll do it in 9 days. And Joe went back into Parliament, and he said he told you. I don't know whether he did or didn't. But then that became the rigueur. In other words, from that date on, interest rate reductions by the Reserve Bank were passed on at a much faster rate than it ever have been done in the past. And I've asked Joe to this very day, and he would never tell me. I said, mate, were you having me on when you said that the Prime Minister had spoken to Westpac and Westpac said they were going to pass on in 10 days instead of 12 days? Because my assessment of it would be Westpac would never agree to that, given that they're such a big bank, because the amount of money they would lose relative to the amount of money I would lose, because the size of their book would be ridiculous. Why would they even take that thing? And I've often been waiting for the day that I have John Howard sitting here in front of me and ask him, did Joe Hockey actually talk to you about it, and Westpac say to you that they're going to beat me and they're going to reduce the interest rate pass forward by 2 days? Or was that just Joe playing me? And by the way, played me well, and he got me perfectly, and ended up being a great outcome for Australian consumers.
Mark, I have a good memory, but I can't recall it. I'm not saying it didn't happen.
Joe?
No, I'm not saying it
I
didn't
love
happen.
Joe.
I mean, Joe, I could easily have done, but I just have no particular recollection of it.
Yeah. Parliament was sitting, by the way, at the time.
Yeah, well, we were very interested in the rapid passing on of rate reductions. And it is true that the practice now is, as soon as it happens,
Yeah.
the
You pass it on.
Pass it on.
And you know what, John? Like, what's actually happened here is your government prosecuted without fear or favour the banks, and ultimately, in those days, the banks were making 340 basis points margin. Today, they're getting 120, only as a result of competition.
Oh yeah, well that was the whole idea of getting foreign banks in.
Yeah, correct.
Bit more competition.
And in Australians today, we enjoy quite a low margin relative to the cost of money.
Quite a low. I mean, I just from talking to my two sons who at various times have lived in America, and it's good.
So
now, but I just don't recall that. I'm not saying it didn't happen. Don't get me wrong.
It doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, it happened. And,
it happened,
and it's a good outcome.
And that was beneficial to Australian borrowers.
And Joe was always very clever. Joe
was good minister. Good bloke.
Very clever. And if I then now reflect on, I want to reflect on something else, because one of your, let's call it competitors in political sense, which was Paul Keating, who you defeated in '96. Keating introduced, as you know, the superannuation guarantee. And I think it's a great piece of legislation. I really do. It's great for Australians. And it's still considered to be one of the best policies to make sure that...
Compulsory savings measures.
Correct. That, and so much so that when people retire, they're not sort of living off the government purse, like to some extent at least. But what do you think now that, and I haven't asked Paul Keating, I have asked him, but he hasn't responded, but what do you think now is going on? What do you think about this introduction of this tax over superannuation companies, superannuation people who have more than $3 million worth of assets accumulated in their super?
Well, I don't like that. And I share the criticism of the current opposition of that measure. If there's a level of arbitrariness in it, why 3 million? Why not lower or higher? Well, I'm not in favour of being lower.
Well, the Greens want it to be 2, by the way.
I know the Greens want it to be 2, and it'd be all hell to pay. I don't think the government will agree to that, but they might. I was critical, I have to be honest, of the guarantee system when it was introduced, and I accept that. But I also accept that many elections have occurred since, and the public has voted, and there are some things that you might have criticised when they first happened, but you don't any longer, and that's one of them. And we go along, I accept that it's part of the furniture, but I don't think it should be seen as some kind of new cash cow and the whole idea of superannuation is to lift the burden on the state by reducing the call on the pension. And if you lose sight of that, I think you lose sight of the purpose of superannuation. There was a time when there was no superannuation for self-employed people. I remember when I was Treasurer, I introduced for the first time a tax deduction for people who made provision for superannuation for themselves if they were self-employed. I mean, if you're a doctorate solicitor, you didn't. And there was a lot of scepticism about that in sections of the public service. Some of them, I'm not saying the Treasury, but some said, oh, well, why would you introduce a tax concession for self-employed people? Most of them don't pay any tax anyway. Now, that was unfair, but that was part of the prejudice from government employees against self-employed people. Now, that all, over time, that has all changed, and we no longer argue about that, neither we should. But it's just a reminder that what is contestable at a point of time can become uncontestable if the measure remains, and that's happened with the superannuation guarantee. But having said that, I'm not in favour of what the government is proposing to do, and I hope I've no idea, when I say hope they don't do it, I'll finish that sentence. I've no idea whether they will or they won't, but I hope they don't.
If I could maybe just turn the page a little bit on moving away from that type of stuff, and let's just, right now it's geopolitical tensions around the world. I dare say you would agree, in lots of forms. And our partners, our long-standing partners, the United States, who you must have had, relationships and interactions with them during your prime ministership and your leadership. How sensitive are our alliances with places like the US, UK, Japan, South Korea, etc.? How sensitive are they as to policies that we might get up, our leadership today might get up on a stage about, and where they clash with their policies? I mean, and how do we put our relationships and our alliances at risk by coming up with policies that are different to theirs on a global scale policies?
So there's no blanket answer to that, Mark. It depends on a given situation. Now, there is a permanence about our relationship with the United Kingdom and the United States. I mean, we have historically, our relationship with the British is deeper and stronger than any other. But the relationship with America is very close, and it transcends Labor and Liberal, Republican and Democrat. I had a very good relationship with Bill Clinton. He was Democratic president. I served 4.5 years with him and 7.5 years with George Bush. And I was very close on a personal basis with Bush, and we have remained in touch at various times since. I also had a very close relationship with Tony Blair. In fact, I was the only Australian Prime Minister that Tony Blair ever dealt with. When he became British Prime Minister, he defeated John Major, and by the time I was defeated, Gordon Brown had replaced Blair. But I got on very well with Blair. And one of the things is that at an international level, domestic political differences don't matter all that much. And on some very important issues, Blair and I were on the same page. I mean, the same page on Afghanistan and Iraq and terrorism. Now, right at the moment, there's a lot of debate about the differences on Palestinian recognition. And now you can debate that. I don't think in the long run they're going to damage in a permanent way the relationship. The relationship between the two countries is it's been nurtured by battlefields together and common values. We have a lot of sporting rivalry with the United Kingdom, particularly in the cricket field and the rugby league and whatever. And that's, I think, that's a symbol of the closeness of the relationship. You can have that fierce, hateful rivalry on the sporting field, but it not shake the relationship. And we had an opportunity as a nation, and in retrospect, I'm pleased I was able to give it, to break the link with the British monarchy, and we decided against it in 1999. I mean, by 55 to 45.
That was a vote for Republican.
Yeah, vote for a Republic.
Republic.
Now, I mean, I was against a Republic, and a lot of my friends were in favour, some against. Anyway, but the point is that the opportunity was given, we decided against it. I suspect at the moment there's even less support for a Republic in Australia than there was then. I think partly because people think, well, what the heck, it works. And we are very pragmatic people. We're more pragmatic and less sentimental than Americans are. I mean, if you think of the monarchy, people say, oh, that's sentimental. No, it's not really. It's part of the system that works. And it seems to work better than the American. The American political system has had a bad couple of years. I mean, you had two people in Donald Trump and Kamala Harris that were regarded by a lot of people as a poor choice. Now, I'm not saying the American people chose Trump. I agree with some of the things he said. I disagree totally with his refusal to leave the field when the umpire's finger went up in 2020. He tried, according to all the evidence I've seen, to stop the Vice President certifying the lawful outcome of that election. Now, I don't think you should do that. I think you have to accept. You may not like it, but you've got to accept what the public says.
I think you were quite vocal at the time too.
Big pardon?
You were quite vocal at the time too.
I was, and I don't run away, but I accept that he won the last election and the American people are entitled to elect who they elect. I don't think their system works well. I think a parliamentary system is better. I think back to the Watergate scandal, where for months the American president, he was paralysed with Nixon. Would he be removed? Would he be impeached? Now, in our system of government, that had been easily solved. If the Prime Minister had been in the situation Nixon was in, the party would have said, time for you to go, mate. We're not going to cop this any longer, and would have replaced him or her with somebody else. Now, I think that's a better system, but they're not going to change, and we're not going to change ours. But the point I make, and I connect it to the Republic, is that we are a pragmatic people. Now, I think having a monarchy is a better system, but I think one of the reasons it survived is that it works. And we're sceptical of big changes that don't work. We have what I've often called a deep deposit of Celtic scepticism. You know, the Irish and Scottish in us. And they sort of are suspicious. People say, oh, I'm going to do this. And what do you really want? And I think the voice referendum was a victim of that. Now, I think there were reasons why people should have voted against the voice, but I think the main reason why they ended up being beaten by a bigger margin was because people just were unconvinced that they thought it was more than met the eye, and why take a risk, and what the hell, why should we mess around with this? Now, that's all our scepticism. And I think
it's ingrained in us. It's ingrained in us.
It is ingrained, and I think it's a good thing. It means that lunatics can't grab the stage.
What do you think that you mentioned Tony Blair, you mentioned George Bush Sr., you mentioned Bill Clinton. How is it that you were able, or what was it you did to become friends with them?
The point I'm making is that the common values and the intrinsic worth of the person can transcend any political difference. I mean, I was very close. I mean, George W. Bush and I are the same side of politics. Yeah. Clinton nominally was different, although he's a very centrist Democrat. But H.W. Bush was George Bush's father. He and Bob Hawke got on very well together. And of course, Tony Blair and I, as I say, I to this day, I mean, normally when I go to Britain, I always catch up with him and have a drink and a yarn.
But do you think that there's a process? I mean, do you often send a message to them? Is there something that, because we're getting all the media talking to us now about, Albanese is not close enough to Trump, although he did put up a selfie today in the papers. I noticed of him and Trump together. But do you think there's something that John Howard did, or something that John Howard represented? I'm not talking about political colours.
No.
Is there something that you represent, or that perhaps your friendships with them, they represented something different too? Perhaps it might be.
Well,
both,
I think it's
two-way.
unfortunate that it's taken so long for the Prime Minister of Australia to have a face-to-face sit-down with the President of the United States. I mean, I'll leave it. I won't say Albanese and Trump. I'll just, because in the past that hasn't happened, but in the past it sort of wasn't a point of contact. I mean, I remember when I became Prime Minister, I actually visited Jakarta and Tokyo and Beijing as Prime Minister before I went to Washington or London. Nobody thought for a moment I wasn't pro-American and pro-British. It's just that they weren't issues then. They are issues now, partly because of the manner of the new President of the United States. I mean, he's certainly different, but he won. And I agree with, I watched his speech at the UN. I have some scepticism, which I share with him, about the effectiveness of the UN, but I certainly thought what he did on Iran's nuclear capacity was courageous and effective. On the other hand, I don't like him saying that people who criticise him should be singled out. I mean, media, that is. You can't. You've got to accept criticism. My view about is democracy survives in Australia because we have three essential characteristics of our institutions. We have a robust parliamentary system. We have an incorruptible judiciary. And we have a free press. Now, if you've got those three things, you don't need anything else. You need a legal system that's above reproach, and that if people break the law, they're dealt with. And that applies to everybody, to all of us. And you need, I think, a robust parliamentary system is better than a presidential system. The problem with the presidential system, a la the American one, is that the president is not exposed on a daily basis to questioning by the opposition when the parliament's sitting. The president never goes to Congress except to deliver the State of the Union. They all stand and cheer or boo. Now that's
so it's not as robust in debate sense.
Oh, no, it's not. And it's not as forensic.
Yeah.
And you can actually, if you've got a problem and you've got good opposition people who will ask you the same question in a different way 20 times, you've got to be careful. You don't make a slip.
So you just mentioned the media, the free press in Australia. During your period, there was Murdoch and Packer, and Stokes, but probably those two were much larger in the scheme of things at that time. Oh, and Fairfax, of course. I forgot.
And the ABC.
And the ABC, yes. How does a Prime Minister, or should a Prime Minister build a relationship with either the proprietors of the media or in the ABC's
providing
case?
It's a proper relationship. I enjoyed Kerry Packer's company. I thought he understood what made the average Australian tick very well. And I thought that performance of his before the
Senate inquiry.
parliamentary inquiry was vintage. I know Rupert Murdoch well. I think Rupert Murdoch is arguably the greatest international businessman Australia's produced.
I'd say that's right too, yeah.
Yeah, he's terrific.
Long term too. Still.
Oh, yeah, long term. I think very bright. And what I liked about Rupert was that, he came when he came to Australia when I was Prime Minister. He always got in touch with me, and we'd have a meal, either just the two of us, or if he had his local henchman, he'd come along, Arthur Sinodinos would come along with me, and we'd have a logical. But he didn't spend that time lobbying for News Corp. I mean, he had other people doing that. No, don't get me wrong, but he spent the time talking about issues, and he was interested in international politics and all that kind of stuff. Now, I knew what his views were on a lot of issues. I knew that some of the positions that we took would upset him, but mostly his papers were fair and reasonable. They were very supportive of our position on Iraq, which was controversial. He was very supportive of my attitude on industrial relations. Kerry Packer, on the other hand, was very opposed to the GST. He told me so in unrestrained terms.
Yeah, no uncertain terms, the Kerry.
No uncertain terms. There's no such thing. But that's fine. I didn't mind and didn't alter our relationship or friendship. I wouldn't claim that I was a close personal friend of either, but I had a good friendship with each of them. And I'm sure that some of my Labor predecessors were the same. And Kerry Stokes I know well, and because Ryan is now the and I don't know Lachlan as well, but I know him. But you've got, inevitably, you should have a relationship with them. Now, it only becomes improper if you have some kind of secret understanding. You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Now, I never had that with any media proprietor, but I didn't regard them as ogres. I didn't regard them as dangerous species to be avoided at all costs.
So was it a matter of then, I mean, is it the same bridge that you built with presidents and prime ministers of the UK, of Britain? Is it the same sort of bridge that you built with proprietors of media as well, whereas it was one of mutual respect, but at the same time, I got my view, you've got your views, and you're not going to necessarily...
No, but also I didn't feel that you couldn't have a certain lightheartedness in the relationship and share a joke and so forth.
So if I can just fast forward now to the election, the most recent election, federal election I'm talking about, the Liberal Party didn't do so well. The coalition didn't do so well. Actually, the National Party held its own. The Liberal side of it.
The National Party did hold its own.
Held its own, but the Liberals did not.
No.
And and I had Peter sitting right there, Peter Dutton, as I did Anthony Albanese, and sitting right there. And I was at the time, to be frank with you, very impressed with Peter Dutton's intellect, his grasp on issues, his knowledge, his personableness, like very personable to me. I felt he's not some crazy policeman who wants to lock everybody up.
No. Anything but.
He's the opposite. Family man, talked about his family, adoringly, and as did Anthony Albanese, so as did the Prime Minister. And I found them both engaging and friendly and very likeable, quite affable, both of them. Where did it go wrong for Dutton?
Well, I don't think it automatically follows that because they were both affable and everything,
No, it doesn't.
it should have gone better for Dutton. I was surprised that the Labor Party increased its majority. Now, what went wrong? I think that the normal tendency of the Australian public is to give a newly elected government a second
term,
just out of a sort of fair go principle, unless there's an overwhelming reason not to. Now, I don't think we established that. Now, why, I don't know. Some people say it's because we didn't spend enough time developing detailed policy, and there's no alternative to that. I mean, to the extent that my views have been sought, I've said you've just got to immediately start devising alternative policies in detail and then make calculations as to when and how you release them, because there's no substitute. If you're asking people to throw out a first-term Prime Minister, no matter what you think of him, you've got to have a reason. I think that was I think there were a couple of particular policy areas. They seem to get into strife on the work from home issue. And that would have, if you look at some of the seats that...
Especially Peter's own seat.
Well, the seat of Robertson, which is Gosford, the Central Coast, a lot of people there commute to the city. Well, they did, and a lot of them now are working from home, and they thought they had to go back to commuting to the city. That might have influenced how they voted. But that's just an example that I quote. I think I was surprised at the fact the Labor Party increased its vote. Now...
Was that more of a protest against the Liberal, do you think, as opposed to people saying, "Wow, I want to be in lockstep with Labor"?
I don't know the answer to that, Mark. I think it's probably, as always, a bit of both.
Yeah, because I was disappointed in the outcome because I was equally surprised. I thought Peter would give it. I thought the Liberals, the coalition,
I thought Peter held the show together well. I like him a lot. I was very sorry that he lost his seat, and but he'll survive, and but it's tough.
But to the Liberal Party,
I liked him a lot.
I did too. I didn't know him before, but I met him on a couple of
Well,
occasions.
I made him a minister fairly early in the piece because I thought he was calm and sensible, and many business people with whom he dealt speak well of him as having a common sense understanding of what they were putting to the government.
I would expect, though, today, members of the Liberal Party, and I definitely would hope, that senior members of the Liberal Party, the Liberal movement, do they come and talk to you? I would expect them to.
Oh, yes, I some of them do. Not all of them. I don't expect that. It's a while now since I've been in Parliament.
Yeah, but your observations are pretty important. You're actively thinking.
That's look, I had a meeting yesterday with Ted O'Brien, who's the deputy leader, and it was a useful discussion, and we'll keep in touch. And I've spoken on a number of occasions with Susan Lee, and others I know well. Although time marches on, you see a lot of the people that I do. I mean, Peter Dutton's gone, and Josh Frydenberg, who I knew very well, and I still talk to Josh, but he's no longer in Parliament. He might try and come back, but if he does, he'll have to probably do it at the next Parliament. I know Jacinta Price very well. I think she's a popular figure in Liberal circles because of the work she did on the referendum, but equally, you've got to be careful about people talking up your leadership prospects too soon.
Is politics vicious? Is politics
Is
within
it
a party?
vicious?
Within a party?
Well, it can be, and I think sometimes the viciousness can be exaggerated. I mean, people talked about the differences of opinion I had with Andrew Peacock, who's now no longer with us. Now, there were differences, yeah, and I said for a long time that we were equally to blame for those differences, but I think they can be exaggerated. And it was made to order because he came from Melbourne, I came from Sydney. He was a more, I guess, gifted, colourful, flamboyant sort of character. But I liked Andrew, and I buried the hatchet years ago, years after. And I remember one of the first things I did when we became government was appointing me ambassador to Washington.
Well, that's not a bad job, by the way.
Well, he did it well, and he met his third wife there, Penny.
And he had a couple. He had a couple of wives.
Well, that's his business. I don't get into that.
So, because it seems to me, just as an observer, but a keen political observer, that often treasurers are sort of thinking to themselves, one day,
they've been countertops.
I want to be the Prime Minister, which is ambition. That's fine.
Oh, yes, and a lot of people have transitioned from being... Harold Holt did it back in, I think, Watson, who was the first Labor, I think he'd been a treasurer for a period of time. Of course, when Menzies became Prime Minister, his treasurer for a long time was Fadden. He was leader of the Country Party, but then it was Holt. And then when Philip Lynch was his first treasurer, and then because he dominated the scene, but that happens. And one of the great advantages of Treasury is that you're across every portfolio.
As you were.
Yeah. And I found that I had knowledge of portfolios that occasionally exceeded that of the incumbent minister, but not because I was a genius, but just simply because the quality of people in Treasury is very high, and they give you a lot of advice, which is valuable, and you retain it, and it means that you're off to a good start later on.
And of course, Scott Morrison was in the same
Well,
process.
Morrison did it, yes.
Treasurer to Prime Minister.
He did. I'd forgotten him. More recent example, yes.
And even at state level, I mean, I remember Nick Greiner went from the same thing, and so did Gladys.
Well, yes.
Greiner went from Treasury to
Yeah,
Premier,
he was.
and Gladys went Treasurer to Premier.
And as was Perrottet.
Yeah, Dominic. Yeah.
Hmm.
And it just seems to me that there's a process. I mean,
because it's the most second. It's regarded after the Prime Minister as the most significant person. At a federal level, the Foreign Minister also gets... And one of the features of my time in government, and I think it contributed to the stability we had, was that for the first time since Federation, the same three people occupied the Prime Ministership, the Treasury and Foreign Affairs for the duration of the government.
Oh, wow.
Alexander Downer was my first and only Foreign Minister. Peter Costello was my first and only Treasurer, and I was Prime Minister. It was for the whole time. So for just under 12 years.
So each term, right, okay.
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah. And that's quite significant because it builds up a reservoir of experience and knowledge that is hard to replicate.
And trust.
And trust.
For those people in those portfolios. And I often forget about, and I should not, Alexander Downer, one of the great foreign ministers.
Downer did, he was a great foreign minister, steady hand, reliable. And when I look at the way in which our relations with countries in our own region are under pressure at the moment, I think this government has got a foreign policy almost of crisis proportions on its hands. With PNG is iffing and butting about signing a security deal with us, obviously under pressure from the Chinese. Vanuatu has done the same. And prior to that, the Solomon Islands. Now, when you think of World War II, and the term used endearingly by Australian diggers of the fuzzy wuzzy angels, I mean, we owe a lot to the people of Papua New Guinea for the help they gave us against the invading Japanese. I think it's just terrible. And you've got the president of Indonesia talking about approvingly of China's involvement. You've got to worry about that, man. That's a big deterrent. And that's our doorstep. That's right next door to us. And instead of worrying about whether we host the next, gathering on the environment, you can imagine if we are awarded that, the government, and I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. You can walk and chew gum at the same time. But heavens above, I think the government should turn its focus back on what's on our doorstep and recognise that when you've got PNG, Vanuatu, President of Indonesia, all of whom are seemingly out of sync with us and our government, that's a worry and something we should do something about immediately.
As one of our, in my opinion anyway, one of our most revered and senior political figures over a long period of time in this country, what do you feel or what do you think about the future of Australia?
Oh, I'm an optimist because I think we have inherent strengths. We're pragmatic, appropriately sceptical, but nonetheless idealistic. And we have a set of values. We still believe in the fair go, and we are still welcoming the migrants. I mean, I believe in having migrants flowing into this country. I think we've all benefited from it. I've watched the big change from European only to some Middle Eastern, the Lebanese Maronite really, and other Eastern and European, to include migrants from China and India. So much so that for the last few years, the three biggest source countries have been India, China, Britain/Ireland. Now, that is a huge change.
Mm.
But I am very much in favour of the old approach of assimilation, integration. I think the idea of people are attracted to Australia. They come here, they accept and embrace our values. They're not expected to forget their homeland. I don't think, I never thought that applied. I think of so many people I know of Greek and Italian and whatever background, they never sort of gave up an affection. And we're grateful, not only culinary reasons, but other reasons they didn't. And I think the idea of a federation of tribes, which multiculturalism always meant to me, is bad. Now, maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was just a modern term for integration or assimilation. I don't think it was, actually. I think it was a device to curry support from different groups. But whatever it was, I think the instinctive notion of Australians is we welcome people from everywhere as long as they seek to become Australian.
I agree with that.
Yeah. I mean, that's me. That's what I believe in, and it's worked. And I think of all the people, and I've not ever met a multicultural man or woman. I've met a bicultural person. I know plenty of people who are simultaneously Australian and Chinese, or Australian and Greek. And I think that works. I think it's what people want. And they also want to be able to say, well, if the migrant intake is so big that it's putting an unreasonable strain on our infrastructure, then we should slow it down until that unreasonable strain abates. Now, what's wrong with that?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be permanent. It's just a slowdown.
That's just, nobody's arguing that
It's not racist.
No, it's not. I mean, I got into trouble years ago when I said people were worried that what was then a new experience, a surge in Asian migration, maybe we should slow it down to, in the interest of social cohesion, not stop it, not keep the slowdown permanent. Oh, that was racist, and I got into all sorts of trouble. But that's years ago.
Before I leave all this, I have to turn to sport for a moment. Your favourite cricket team, which is, as I remember, is St George Cricket. St George Cricket is your favourite local cricket club.
Well, no, I must say that although I grew up in that area, Earlwood was sort of
part of St George
what
area.
I call half St George, half
Canterbury.
And Canterbury Boys High School took pupils from the St George area.
Yep.
I never really had a club. I played a lot of cricket for a local church team, which was in the New South Wales Churches competition, and that embraced teams from all over.
What was that team called? What was that? What was that church?
The Earlwood Methodist.
Earlwood Methodist Church.
And we played. I enjoyed it eventually. We played in places like the Tempe Reserve and Steel Park and Rudd Park and in Belmore, and it was all good fun.
But you do love your cricket.
Oh, I loved cricket. I wasn't much good at it. I did once get 6 for 97 playing against, I think, Punchbowl Baptist. But that's just a vague record. But I enjoyed cricket immensely, and I still do, and I'm looking forward to the Ashes contest. But a lot of sport. I'm looking forward when I'm in Dallas, in Denver, I understand sheerly by sheer coincidence, there's a soccer match between an Australian team and an American team. So I'm going to go to that and watch it.
And what about rugby league?
Oh, yeah, I follow St George.
Yes.
That's St George.
Ah, right.
That's the rugby league. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm very much a St George man with rugby league. I've seen some good St George. I was there at Cogra Oval or Jubilee Oval when St George defeated the Melbourne Storm. Early part of this season. I think St George will do even better next year. I mean, they were very spasmodic this year. They have been. They had some big wins over teams that ended up in the final 8, such as the Melbourne Storm, but then lost to others.
So I have one final thing for you, John. Arthur Laundy asked me to ask you this question.
Oh, Warney.
No, Arthur Laundy.
Oh, Arthur Laundy. I'm sorry, I'm deaf.
Arthur Laundy.
Yeah, I know Arthur well.
And I said to Arthur yesterday because I was talking.
Well, I knew his son better.
Yeah, well, he's a great guy, Craig. But Arthur said to me, he said, and actually Arthur used the words, ask the Prime Minister, but you're no longer the Prime Minister. But he said, ask him that during his 3 terms, on balance, would he say that as Prime Minister it was more of a job, or did he enjoy going to work every single day?
Oh, it was a job I enjoyed immensely. Now, did I enjoy going to work every day? I think I did. Well, I never felt like staying in bed to avoid the day.
So you fronted up no matter what?
Oh, yeah, I fronted up. I believed in if you're in a hole, you had to dig yourself out or stop digging it. Some people say you should stop digging. But no, I enjoyed it, and it was a challenge, but it was a privilege, and the opportunity. And I felt that it was a rare opportunity to do something that improved things. And when I look back and think of, what we did with guns, what I did is often not talked about to expand the opportunity for people on more modest means to send their kids to independent schools if that's what they wanted. I thought changing the tax system was good. I thought a lot of things I think back, but I guess to this day, if I'm stopped in the street by people who want to say something nice to me, they talk about guns.
It was a massive legacy.
Well, it is, and people, particularly, but not only women, they worry about their children, their schools, and people.
You just want to be safe.
They just want to be safe.
Yeah.
And the first responsibility of a government is to make the country and the people of the country feel safe, and that's drove me, and I'm very grateful that we, in the end, got there. As to what other countries do, well, that's there. I don't presume to lecture the Americans about that. I feel for them. They have gun incidents all the time. And I'm not saying we won't have any more in Australia. I can't. But all I do know is that we did all we could in the wake of that to prevent it happening again.
And to make it harder.
Yeah.
And then Arthur had one more question to me, and he said he's always been curious about this. Where does Mrs. Howard fit into the life of a Prime Minister? I mean, not saying that one would influence her, but do you you're the closest person to you on the planet. Do you have rules or don't have rules about what you talk about, what you don't talk about? Or what you celebrate?
You don't have rules. It's instinct.
Instinct.
We talked about everything. Jeanette was a wonderful source of support, advice and affection, as were my 3 children. And they are now, the youngest is 45, so they were very much alive to things when, and they generally agreed with me. Not all. I mean, one of my sons was particularly supportive of what Peter Rees did on the waterfront. He said, "Dad, you lot have been talking about fixing the waterfront for years, but at long last somebody's done something now."
This is the Patrick's days.
Yeah, Patrick's. Corrigan.
Peter Corrigan.
Corrigan and Rees.
Chris Corrigan.
And John Sharp, before he left Parliament, had quite a bit to do with it as well. But look, without a family and we could talk about issues at home, and I hope in a sensible, sober way, and we had our prejudices, and they were broadly supportive of me. On some issues they were to the right of me, on some issues they were not as far to the right as me, but overwhelmingly supported what I did. And we survived and remained very close, and that's the greatest achievement of my life, without any doubt, far more than anything I did in politics, is the affectionate bond that I have with my wife and 3 adult children and their children.
Well, John Howard, I think that'll do us on that note. And I want to thank you for the privilege of you sharing your time with me and our audience. But it really is a privilege, and to actually share all those ideas, but your time, really importantly. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Mark. I've enjoyed it. Thank you.